available. Thank you. We do have closed captioning available. There's also, I want to draw your attention to the chat box. This is a great place to say hello, let us know who you are, where you're joining us from. So you might want to add that stuff in the chat. Also, you can ask questions and things like that in the chat as well. We are doing this in a meeting format. We usually do a webinar format, but this time we're doing a meeting format, which lets us all look at each other. If you have your video on, we do ask that you keep your mute on during the presentation. Raise your hand if you have a question. Yeah, I think that's all. Anything else, Griffin, that you'd like us to, any messaging out to the group? Okay, and then we also have a certificate of attendance that will be available to you about halfway through. We will plop a link into the chat, and you can follow that link, and it will fill out the form there, and it will send you a certificate. Okay, so with that, I'm delighted to hand it over to an amazing group of people today. Griffin, I'm going to turn it over to you to take it from here.
Fantastic. Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah, that's
amazing. Good. Thank you. So nice to be here with everybody. Okay, so I'm going to act as sort of the main facilitator of moving this forward. I'm really glad to be here with everybody. Thank you for being here in this meeting format. We're going to do an experiment later with breakout rooms and hope that we get the chance to actually talk. So I'm just going to start with a couple of access, space making, and treaty pieces that are important to us to make sure that you feel comfortable and situated, and also just to talk about our responsibilities. Then I'm going to turn it over to Les Harper, who acted as an anti-colonial research consultant on the project for the whole 3-year duration. Then we're going to talk to you together about our project, our research findings, our demands and next steps. We're going to have a short question and answer period. And then by about 1:20, we're going to try going into themed breakout rooms. And my hope is that we'll be able to have some really good conversation. But again, this is an experiment. We've never done breakout rooms with this many people. So we're excited to try it with you. And then we'll return together for some collective strategizing. And then we'll close. Really, the hope is that some ideas for real change come out of today. And we want to support you in taking our findings and demands and making change. So everyone can hear me? Yeah? Amazing. And can see the screen? Captions are on? Amazing. The thumbs up are super helpful. People can access the chat if you want it. Amazing. We have a few chat moderators here who are here to just be present for you. We've also got someone doing tech support, and I'll talk about this in a sec, but we have someone as an active listener in case people need to take a step away. Any other access needs we can meet in this moment? Okay, if you find anything comes up and you want to direct message me, or you want to put it in the chat, then we will try to meet those needs. So we are in temporary community with each other today. And we're also going to be talking together in small groups, and you're going to be hearing difficult information. Some of it might, particularly if you've worked in an exploited frontline position, a position that is reserved for people doing the brilliant, important work in your own communities that isn't always, in fact, is rarely really recognized and supported by mainstream agencies. You may hear your experiences reflected back at you. For folks who are decision makers who don't have lived experience, you may hear some stuff that is difficult to hear, painful. And so we have a couple of students helping us to make some group agreements before we move forward. You can see them if you open this Google Doc that's in the chat. but you can't add to them, but the students can. So I'd like to just take a moment and ask, are there any things that folks want to put into the space that will help us share space together? Are there group guidelines you like? How do we want to treat each other in this space? You can put it in the chat, or we can take a couple of people raising their hands or just shouting it out. Thoughts for principles or guidelines to share this space? Collective care. So that means, sorry, go ahead. Respect.
First and foremost.
I got a message saying that everyone is doing their best, so be kind. I imagine that collective care also means thinking about the impact of our words on others, maybe impacts we might not anticipate, and being willing to hear if our words have impacts on others and shift our behavior, recognizing that we're trying our best. Any other agreements? Generosity of spirit. Empathy. Recognizing that passion is not aggression. That's a beautiful one. Expecting passion, expecting intensity, because we're actually talking about difficult things. Okay. If you disagree with something someone says, pause before reacting. All right, you can keep dropping things in the chat and you'll be able to see that Google Doc growing as the students put that together and format it. But I am going to move forward if that's okay. Do folks feel okay? Okay. We also have an active listener here today. So Julia Walter, who has active listener in her profile name, is around. You can direct message Julia and you can pop into a breakout room that's reserved for just you and Julia, or if you need a small group of folks, in case things get intense and you want to just like have some space to breathe. So SPW does our work on the occupied territories of the nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We're accountable to the Dish with One Spoon and the Two Row Wampum, which are both pre-Confederation, so pre-Canada treaties, which are the true laws of this land and are very different than colonial laws, as well as Treaty 13. As a colonizer, a white person, I can't give you teachings about these treaties, but I do want you to know that thinking about treaty, getting some knowledge and information about treaties from Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe thinkers was really central to every one of our meetings together. The settler colonial state, corporations, social service agencies, and individuals break and violate these treaties consistently. SPW tries to pay attention to our treaty responsibilities in everything we do as individuals and as community. As part of thinking about how to not do research in a colonial way and how to combat some of the ways that colonialism and linked systems of power impact social service work, we were really lucky to have Indigenous health promoter and community leader Les Harper on our project from day one, checking in with us, checking us, guiding us, and reminding us specifically of the traps and lies of colonialism in research and social service work, reminding us that no matter how progressive a social service work agency or an educational institution seems, it's still colonial if it's in this system, and reminding us to do everything we can to move away from that. So I'm going to turn it over to Les to talk a little bit about the sort of work that he does and the guidance that he gave us before we move forward. Les, you're muted.
How's that now?
Perfect.
Yeah? You can hear me? So I want to say Dante to all my people of Terrell in here, and I'm very thankful for being here to talk about this path that these people are going on right now to bring out some information to the community that is really regarded in a special way, and how they're trying to do it to try to see all the things that are needed to be seen. And so that's why they asked me, myself, Les Harper. I come from my father comes from Mr. Saskatchewan. My mother comes from Satellite, Alberta, and I grew up in my traditions and my culture. But I grew up in Toronto here, in the city all my life, and I learned how the system worked for Indigenous people and how it didn't work for people. And that was a key thing that I seen a lot. And then as you see now, there's different things that happen now. When I was younger, people wouldn't acknowledge land acknowledgements, and to this day they still get it wrong. Like the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe, people do not acknowledge that the Wendat are from this location right here, but they've been added to that through the colonial system, and that's something that hasn't been fixed or hasn't been looked at. There's nobody to correct that, and that's the problem with a lot of the stuff that we have. That there's nobody to correct it unless they feel that they have that entitlement to want to change those things. And so with that, my work has been working with the community. I'd like to say more street-based, and working with people that are the marginalized as possible. That is in my community, Indigenous people on the street that are people that use drugs, people that do sex work, people that do things that are not in the norm of our setting, which I have great pride and great love for our people have survived. I always quote this John Trudell. He always says, like, we have a great debt we owe to the so-called drunken Indian. And people have heard me speak, I always talk about this, is that John Trudell said that they wanted us to be something and become white and be that part of that white mind and the white mind thinking, but we could never do that. And they took us from our land and our where we're living, and took away our culture and traditions we couldn't practice. So we just sat here and drank and just survived. Just be nothing, just be here. And I think that's such a powerful thing, powerful words like that. And it's I talk about it a lot, but I think it's so important for us to realize that it brings things to the bare bones of things, of survival, and helping us deal with colonialism and oppression, and how this world has been basing itself on now, right? And it's not just Indigenous people. I know that there's so many people that have suffered so many ways of that mindset, and so we have to look at that and try to work with that and try to see what can we do. How do we survive? How do we be a part of something that that is heavy and hard? As many as you, I know many of you, I see some of the names on here, and see all the people that have worked at different things, at prisons, shelters, and different things, that there's so much suffering going on there that we have to, find that, that breath, like, to breathe. I think somebody had posted that, to breathe. And that's such an important thing, because so much is going on. It was just like, you don't want to take that in, because it's so horrible, and just stop breathing. So, but it's going to happen, and it is happening. So we need to deal with it, and that's the hardest thing we do. Myself, I work on South Riverdale Community Health Center, and I work in the 2 safe injection sites that we have, and then also doing outreach in the community, in the parks and stuff like that. And that's something that there's a reason why those things are happening. Like, look at the parks. It's like, well, like, why is that happening? It's because the people took that up, and they found a way to make themselves safe and feel comfortable who they are. And all we have to do is just help them and listen. That's all we have to do. It's like the simplest job that we have. It's just to listen to them, and they know what they want and what they need. And that's the thing, is that we have to let's find a way to bring it to them. And that's such an important thing. We must, do. And so with this work, with this project here, is such an important thing. And I hope that everybody keeps on doing what they're doing, and also taking care of themselves. It's so important that you're doing that, and the great work that you're doing. And I'm very thankful to be asked to be speaking on this. And I say miigwech and hi, and let's try to take care of each other and be there for each other, because a lot of people are against this, what we're doing. And I say miigwech.
Thank you so much, Les.
Thank you, Les. I feel very grateful to have been part of this work. You did exactly that. You listened to us, and then you asked us questions that helped us when we met together as a steering committee to then ask more questions so that we could listen better. And I'm really deeply grateful for all of the wisdom and guidance that you shared with us. And I want to echo what Griffin said earlier about the treaty conversations, and our responsibility and obligations to treaty were central in all of our steering committee meetings. So I want to invite us as this temporary community, and then beyond, I want to invite us to consider, whose land are we on? I know this is a national coming together, so whose land are you on? And how did you come to be on this land? What's your relationship to it? What are your responsibilities to the Indigenous nations and treaties that govern that land? So to really get familiar with the treaties and looking at what those kinds of obligations actually mean in day-to-day interaction, in the ways that we do our work, in the ways that we hold each other, care for each other, resist. And then how can you be sure, this is an accountability question, that you're living up to these responsibilities and or working against colonialism in all that you do? So I'm going to introduce just the next portion of the presentation, where we're going to get into who we are, what the work is, what the work was, who we are as a team, and then support some findings. But supporting peer work, or the SPW project, is a community-guided research project that studied the working conditions of peers in low-barrier social service agencies during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So the funding was obtained in 2019, before the world changed. And we had to really change a lot of things in 2020. So it changed our entire structure of coming together, the way that we envision things, the kinds of questions that we asked. And when we're talking about low barrier social service settings, we're talking about spaces like drop-in centers, community health centers, and so forth. And you can find all of this in our report as well. But this work is in partnership with George Brown College, with Working for Change, and with the Toronto Drop-In Network. It was steered by a committee of experts in our community working from their lived and living experience. So I'm going to ask for each member, just in order of how we appear here, to just introduce themselves to this large temporary community. Andre, do you want to start?
Yeah, hi, I'm Andre Hermanstein. I'm a longtime community member. I've been a part of this project since its inception a few years back, and I'm thankful to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Andre. My name is Lindsay Jennings. I'm a member of the steering committee. I'm someone of lived experience of our prison system and our injustice system. And I am, a longtime community member, and I work in a very, very small nonprofit called Rittenhouse that is completely peer run from our executive director all the way down to our volunteers.
Lindsay, are you done?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead,
Okay.
Maddie. Sorry, that was, yeah.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
First, I want to say hi to any family and friends that decided to join today. I appreciate the support. My name is Madeline Gold. I'm a lived experience advisor, and I've worked front lines for over 8 years. I've been a part of over 20 advisory panels and special projects. And I've been published in different documents. This is Not Home Project, Our Care Priorities Panel, and of course this one, and maybe there's some others, but I won't take up everyone's time. So thanks for coming.
Maria, do you feel like you can introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry, I had a bit of a lag on my end. Hi, I'm Maria. I apologize. I'm not going to have the camera on long, as you can tell, I've been a bit mangled up. I've been in an accident, but I've been a steering committee member since day one in 2020, and loved every second of it. It's been great. I have lived experience with homelessness, mental health, addiction, you name it. And currently I'm working on doing some trainings for peer work and harm reduction.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sueda Bera. I am a steering committee member. I just want to claim my seat here and say thank you to the Safer Supply community of practice. I had the opportunity, and I'm very grateful for it, to be a part of Safer Supply when we were really, really small. So it kind of makes me emotional to see, because I think it's gotten really, really big and it's become a lot more accessible. So yeah, so what else do I have to say? I'm very grateful to be here. I am, like many other people who've already spoken, I am somebody with lived experience in a number of things, from homelessness to drug use, mental health, everything, I guess. And I recognize that it can be very defeating working in the system when you are someone who's working from a lived experience perspective. And I'm really happy that we get to have this conversation today alongside Safer Supply, because it's very, very needed. So thank you.
I think I'm maybe the next person on the list who is present with us. My name is Griffin Epstein. I come to this work as someone who has multiple psychiatric diagnoses, who's in a lineage of people who have had contact with the psychiatric system, who identifies personally as crazy, and who believes that work by people in their own communities is really the only legitimate type of work. Very wary of the social service and social work system, but I'm also an educator at George Brown College in the social service work program. And I have been extremely lucky to be holding down the sort of academic bureaucracy end of this work. And I feel really lucky to be here.
I just want to acknowledge that there's two folks on here, Michael Nurse and Dawn Marie Harriet, who are not here today, but who are critical, like pivotal members of the steering committee, whose wisdom, knowledge, compassion, care, passion are in everything that's here, like everything that's here. So I just want to acknowledge their impact and their presence. My name is Julia Walter. My pronouns are she and her, and I held the role of the research coordinator in the first year of the project. I'm a steering committee member now, and I come to this work as a person who has lived experience with an ongoing relationship with the psychiatric system. I have lived experience with drug use, being unhoused, and violence. And I've done 20 years of frontline work, and I am a community-based researcher, and I work as a person doing trauma therapy, trying to work from an abolition model, which is complicated in all kinds of ways, but I'm really, really grateful to be here. Me again. So I'm going to just talk us through some of the key terms that are guiding this work. And I'm going to start off by the language of peer work. So any social service position that's reserved for people who share lived or living experience with the communities that they serve are called peer workers, including those that go by other names. So that can be outreach workers, harm reduction workers. We know that, or we acknowledge and we know as a team that the word peer is a loaded term. And we support all efforts to develop more accurate and more empowering language. I want to also say that we have multiple views on the steering committee about this term, and have had lots of discussions around it. And we're using this term as a way to sort of speak to the multitudes of ways of understanding. But at the same time, we found that people with different job titles still face discrimination based on their status of being a current or former service user. The next term is community-guided research. So that's a strategy for reducing the harms of academic work by making sure that the people whose experiences that are being researched have control over how their data is collected, analyzed, and used. So ideally, that means that community-guided research turns into action for change. And today is one of those moments where we're really hoping that this is a possibility by reaching out and to the wider community to be able to actually mobilize this knowledge that was gathered from people, from their experiences, from their pain, from the injustice that they encounter. We also want to talk about or identify what low barrier or social service agencies means. So that's a nonprofit like Drop-In, like a community health center that provides survival resources to structurally oppressed people and communities. These organizations are often the most accessible spaces within the social service system, but are still shaped by colonialism, by capitalism, white supremacy, cisheteropatriarchy, and ableism. So you know that there's bolded words here. We don't have time to really get into unfolding these and unpacking these together, but they really have material consequences on people's lives and communities. So on our website, you can find a glossary of how these terms are defined and how they show up in our report.
So I'm going to talk really briefly about what shaped our project. So as Julia noted and how we use terms, we're interested in research that doesn't do the kind of harm that most research does. And so we came together knowing that all research has a lens, even the research that claims to be objective, and that our lens was one that says, we know that peer work, whatever other term you use, that people working from their lived and living expertise in their own communities is a transformative and necessary practice that is different from other types of social support. It's not social work in training. It's not a ramp to social work. It's a necessary, vital form of work that often gives people what they need much more than formal, than sort of non-peer titled work. Also, that peers face exploitation and oppression at nonprofit agencies. This has been documented over and over and over again. We didn't need to repeat that work. We also came together knowing from our own experiences, from what people have told us, from organizing, from research, that the problems that people in these peer positions experience are not because they lack training. So there are tons and tons of training programs to get people into peer work, and peer workers are still exploited in agencies. The problem is not that people aren't trained. The problem is elsewhere. Julia, you're muted.
So just to further expand on how we envisioned a different research, like way of doing research, is that we invested very strongly in the practice of community, which meant that we prioritized the relationships amongst each other as a core principle. Like those pieces were really highlighted. Those pieces became sort of the most accentuated part of the work that we did together. We, as we said before, paid attention to our treaty responsibilities at every meeting, and when we would gather, and even when we would bring other people in, or not even, but especially when we would bring other people in. We made decisions by consensus, and we collaboratively wrote outreach and interview transcripts. So in that, we also identified that we felt it was really important to prioritize talking to folks who were working from their lived and living expertise, more so than folks in managerial positions. We prioritized the needs, the desires, and the insights of peer workers. And we compensated all interviewees equitably. And I just want to make a brief note here, and I'm conscious of time, but one of the practices that became really important to us is that we paid people in advance before we started the recording of interviewing them, because we wanted to ensure that people didn't feel bound to say a specific thing or stay for the entirety of the interview to receive the money or the compensation. So I felt like that was a really important aspect of how we conducted interviews, and that was meaningful in our research.
So we had a lot of really interesting conversations on the steering committee about how to capture people's various identities. So I'm going to give you some demographic information with the huge note that the way we are representing identities here is not actually representing people. People's identities don't happen apart from each other. People are not, I'm not a non-binary person and then some other times a white person, and then some other times, et cetera, et cetera. We live our identities together. Some identities are fluid and change. But in order to capture these identities without identifying people, without putting people in jeopardy, we had to separate them out from each other, which means that these are numbers that are basically here to show you some broad trends, but they don't represent human lives. So we interviewed 35 people in peer positions, and our peer interviewees were relatively racially diverse, 29% white, 26% Indigenous, 11% Black, and 14% of people were racialized, were people of color, but were not Black or Indigenous. A little over half were cisgender women. The rest were cisgender men and trans and non-binary and or gender diverse people, recognizing that actually that last category contains a lot of really different things inside it. But to protect people's identities, we had to smush them all together, which means it's not representing people's actual ways of thinking about themselves. 80% were working as peers at the time of the interview, and we were not focused on people's lived experiences. We were focused on their working conditions and the changes they wanted to make and the brilliant strategies they had. but people did talk about their lived experiences. So most identified as current or former criminalized drug users. Many were or had been unhoused. Several identified as disabled. Some had experience as sex workers, and many had survived incarceration. And we just want to call your attention to the difference in the kinds of identities that people in supervisor positions had. So we interviewed 16 supervisors who were really majority white, so 81% white, and many more were cisgender men than the social work norm. You may know that social work is overwhelmingly white women. And so this is a surprising number of people, not surprising if you think about power, but surprising in terms of demographics, were cisgender men. 80% were working in supervisory or managerial positions over peers at the time. Some identified their own lived and or living experiences, but rarely said anything specific. And many identified as leaders in the field, said they were well-known, they were important leaders in the field, but then were incredibly concerned about being identified in the final report. And this felt like something we wanted to call your attention to, because there were real differences in who was concerned about being seen and who expected anonymity, total anonymity and protection, and who didn't.
So we're going to be transitioning into the findings now. So these were gathered from the data from the interviews. And I just want to make a brief note here as we share some of those findings. Some of them can be difficult to hear about, especially if you're a person who is working from their lived or living expertise in an organization or an agency. We're going to be highlighting things like workplace oppression. We're talking about lateral violence, so that is violence between workers. And we're also talking about ideas of professionalism, which are deeply rooted in but in the concept of colonialism and whiteness. And we're highlighting 6 of our findings.
Hello, everybody again. My name is Sueda and a grateful member of this committee. So the first finding, peers and supervisors define peer work differently. Despite saying they support the unique contributions of peers, supervisors think of peer work as a learning opportunity or stepping stone to mainstream employment. And I just want to touch on this point because it kind of just goes back to not just being exploited, but also like the false hope that a lot of peers are given when they're working in these very shitty agencies. Sorry, I'm just going to be honest. I was one of two, and I know this is a long presentation, and I'm going to try to keep it short because I want to try to bring in my experience working with Safer Supply as someone who at the time I think was only one of 2 people who were in a lived experience or peer position, which at the time was they called it health navigators, which that in itself is I have a lot of issues with that term. It's a way of just like capitalizing on the work once again, when we could have just been peers, because that's what my job was to be in that position. But a lot of the time there'd be conversations around boundaries, and it says in the example or in the quote here, a peer is somebody that is a peer of the community, not of your organization. And a lot of the time I felt like because management or people in different positions didn't realize the sort of what my job actually was, it made it hard for me to come into work every day and doing my and just giving me the ability to do my job how I was supposed to do my job. There was a lot of like eyes on me. There was a lot of questions being asked of me as to how I was doing my work. Because again, peers are not seen as like case managers. They're not even seen as people in your organization. They're often looked at as a liability. So my work would be questioned all the time, which was really annoying because the truth is, especially in the context of Safer Supply, peers know more than the case managers and do more work. They just get paid a lot less. And the second point, peers see their work very differently. I want to stress this point. Peers see their work very differently. Peers challenge oppressive practices and lead new initiatives. They resist the gatekeeping of social services by cultivating community. For some Indigenous workers, peer work is how they decolonize care. That is very risky, because for a peer to live like this, they actually get in trouble a lot in their work, because again, that questioning piece comes up. And I just want to give One example, while I was working with Safer Supply, I was working alongside case managers in a peer position. However, a lot of the time I would have clients come to me. I've had clients come to me showing me weapons in their bags, people with guns in their bags, not knowing what to do and how to get out of these situations. They weren't telling their case managers that. I knew more about their substance use and abuse than their case managers or their doctors and nurses who I would sit in meetings with, or I'd go to appointments with people. And it just blew my mind how little information was being shared from these people who needed care to their doctors and case managers. And there's nothing special about me or being a peer. It just goes to show that the people that we are trying to help feel more comfortable having honest conversations with peers than they do with their doctors and their case managers and whoever the hell is in your organization. And that's why Safer Supply is a model that doesn't really work, because people who are in these positions are in these positions because whether it's their schooling, their education, the fact that they're doctors and nurses. But the truth is, there's so much for you people in those positions to learn, and your work will not be effective unless you find a way to get to know your clientele and have peers do their jobs the way they're supposed to do. So I just wanted to say that, and I will move on. Sorry to go on that tangent.
Hi, I'm Maddie. So number 2 is peers work precarious positions, which supervisors claim is unavoidable. Okay, the pandemic has increased the risk and intensity of peer work, but not the pay. Almost all peers we spoke to worked underpaid and insecure contract jobs with no benefits. Most supervisors acknowledge this inequity, but said their hands are tied. Anyways, by funders. Others justified low pay as necessary so peers could receive social assistance, even though many workers are not on OW or ODSP. Some supervisors said low pay was just an unavoidable reality of poverty and better than nothing. And then, this was a quote from a supervisor. It's a more desperate workforce that's willing to do jobs that many people are not willing to do at a lower rate. I can give an example. So when the pandemic first hit and the world was in a state of emergency, the drop-in that I worked in was still had to serve community members. So I took the subway from one end of the city to the other, so like during the pandemic, and I served meals. Now, at first they offered me $30 to go in, less $30. I had to beg for another 15. So I got $45 to risk my life every day that I went in, and 2 bus tokens. That's like a prime example of how some folks are treated. Okay, next. Who's next? Andre.
Yeah, peers face discrimination, which supervisors justify as support. Many peers experience disrespect and scrutiny from non-peers, with Black peers facing the highest levels of surveillance and distrust. Isn't that a fact? Most peers are asked intrusive questions about self-care while being denied the resources to meet their actual needs. Many supervisors justify their scrutiny of peers as necessary, suggesting that peers need case management and other types of social work support rather than better pay and better working conditions. So here's a quote. I'm a harm reduction worker. We were literally hired to give knowledge about substance use, not serve food, not clean toilets. It seems these jobs that nobody else is willing to do falls on peer workers. And in my experience, that's accurate.
Sorry, hi, it's me. So I'm just having problems on my end with Zoom. So the physical spaces of low barrier agencies are unwelcoming or hostile to peers. Peers are often forced to work in basements or on lower floors. They get locked out of front doors and offices. Black and Indigenous workers reported the greatest barriers to accessing agency space and the most, and the most scrutiny in them. Peers are also subjected to more grief, loss, and violence at work and greater exposure to COVID-19 than any other workers. Outreach and offsite workers, especially. There's two quotes here. If I need that money, which I do, I just put up with the risk of getting sick. And why am I treated like I'm a criminal in my own workspace? I found very true in my experience as well. People will call on me to do what I'll put in quote the bitch work, any work that they don't want to do, which honestly I'm happy to do, but it's not within my job description, and they know this, and they oftentimes take advantage of that. So it feels like a lot of the time I'm doing 5 times the work, which really I'm not meant to be and I shouldn't be, and it's really weighs on you at the end of the day. It takes away from your capacity to really be there for people, but at the same time, at least everything gets done. But we do put up with it because we feel like we're not in a position to say anything back, right?
I'm going to be talking about our 5th finding. Supervisors hold peers to oppressive standards. So supervisors hire peers for their community knowledge, then claim they lack the professionalism to succeed. For many supervisors, professionalism means appearing not to use drugs, be punctual, and not struggling with paperwork. Research shows that these types of professional standards judge a person's access to economic and social stability rather than the quality of their work. They are known to be racist, classist, ableist, and colonial. And 2 quotes that we pulled for this finding. The organization is predominantly very cis, white, straight, and those are the people that are getting promoted. The second one is, the truth is, if I got paid what I'm worth, I don't think I would have a problem attending. You know, for this finding for me really hit a chord. Just, I am someone who's criminalized coming from the incarceration system, and I had a really like enlightening moment when I all of a sudden got a job and had to work in like an organization compared to working on the street and hustling on the street. And that transition for me, not knowing how to move through conflict, had a lot of bias and a lot of triggering moments around how people talk to me and how my supervisors talk to me because they sounded like authority. And then when I would struggle, then they would weaponize my trauma. They would gaslight my trauma and be like, no, Lindsay, those are your traumas from being in jail or from being on the street. And I'm like, no, like you're actually gaslighting my feelings right now in the situation, and we can't even have a conversation. And so I think for folks, especially that are coming, say, from the street, coming from institutions where there not necessarily is even a structure per se, like there's a lot to deal with when you get into this nonprofit world. And it's really not about the work. It's about the interpersonal relationships and navigating the bureaucracy and the politics within the organization. And so if you don't handle things, I'm a very passionate speaker. I'm the one that put passion doesn't mean aggression, because that has been one of my so-called flaws for the 15 years I've been doing this work, is that I speak very aggressively when I just speak from my experience, and I speak from the truth, and I speak from what I know works for working with people that are inside and coming out of jail. And so, yeah, that's our 5th finding, and I'll just send it over to our 6th.
Hi again. So number 6, peers sometimes oppress each other to get ahead. Under inequitable working conditions, peers often compete with and police each other to get better work. Workers with more social power sometimes describe themselves as not like other peers. and or made negative or insulting comments about their colleagues with more oppressed identities. Black and Indigenous peer workers shared the most stories of oppression from their colleagues. Supervisors said that these dynamics between peers made them uncomfortable. God forbid, right? God forbid that supervisors felt uncomfortable. But admittedly sometimes played into the hiring process. Then here's a quote from a peer worker. The peers stick together as much as they can, but because there is not the pay equity and because there are not a lot of full-time permanent peer jobs, people are stepping on each other to get ahead. The only thing I'll say about this is that when I worked in a community agency, I was put as lead, and there was another person who maybe worked there longer than I did. So now I'm supervising them, and they went out of their way to make my life miserable. They were always battling me, confronting me, challenging me. And this went on for like a year. It was awful for me. I mean, I stood my ground, but like to have to go to work and have to deal with, your colleague hating you or trying to always constantly tell on you or catch you in something or keeping an eye and like complaining. And it was awful for me, but that's how things go sometimes. So that's my example. Okay, so Griffin, up next.
It's hard to follow you see how unbelievably brilliant our team is. It's kind of hard to then go back to reading a slide, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read a slide. In summary, while many organizations say they value the contributions of people with lived or living expertise, they actually force peer workers to follow policies and practices that undermine their unique knowledge and skills. Peers face discrimination, neglect, and double standards that block them from making positive change at their organizations and in their lives. To truly support peer work, organizations must break down the barriers the organizations have built to meaningful and equitable employment. This starts with providing all workers job security and a living wage, but it doesn't end there. Many peers with permanent jobs, and I'll note with good pay, still experience oppression in workplace culture and physical spaces. It was rare we found folks who were paid well, but even folks who were paid well, most people were still experiencing oppression within their agencies. Peer workers have the potential to forge new paths and are already doing so, but only if they are trusted, respected, and resourced on their own terms. So we've given you a lot of difficult information, maybe resonant information. What could be different? We have a series of demands.
Okay, I'm back again. All right, so our demands. First one, commit to honoring community knowledge. Agencies must take direction from the people whose needs they claim to meet. People with lived or living expertise should be at every organizational level. Peers should sit in on interviewing folks, which is something I did, because we're going to have a different outlook on what the person's saying than maybe, a drop-in worker or a manager or a supervisor. Everybody sees things differently. But I think a person with lived experience is really going to catch on whether that person is right for the job or not, beside everybody else sitting at the table, in my opinion. Okay, the next thing is change hiring and onboarding. Peer work should not require credentials. People should be hired for their real abilities and trained in things that matter, like labor rights and paperwork. Suwaida, you're up.
I totally missed that. Sorry, which one am I?
You're talking about you want me to do it?
Is it meaningful employment?
No, provide. Yes.
Okay, so provide meaningful employment. Peer roles must be better paid and more secure. Peers also need collective representation, ideally through a separate union, which is something we've talked about a bit and would be really awesome to see happen one day.
The way to read the next one.
Sorry, I don't. One second, guys. I'm so sorry. Ensure physical access and safety. Peers need access to all agency spaces in safe and meaningful ways and need resources to reduce violence and deal with grief in the workplace.
Confront oppression. Agencies must address how colonialism, white supremacy, anti-Black racism, and all forms of oppression shape their work. This starts by hiring, supporting, and respecting Black and Indigenous peer workers, but does not end there.
And our last one is to change the culture. Supervisors should know and understand what value peers bring. They must change their practices and give up some of their power.
So all of this change actually requires like a pretty radical rethinking of what social service work is and does. And that is the only way that real change is going to get made that serves communities. To start that process, agencies actually have to be willing to think about things that are very difficult for agencies to think about. People in supervisory and managerial positions have to be willing to think about things that are very uncomfortable to them. And so we've created a resource for you in hopes of supporting that work. So it includes some questions that we recommend absolutely any agency that claims to support their communities, claims to be hiring from their communities, ask and be willing to think about what your answers are. And if those answers are not satisfactory, change your practices. So this includes questions about the definition of peer work, your governance structures, how you make funding decisions, how you post for jobs, who you hire, how you hire them, how you compensate people, what kind of job security they have, whether they have benefits, workplace safety and access, and more. And you can find this all on our new website. So what's next? This is the end of our funded research project, but it is not the end of our work together. So in some ways, this is a launch of the reports and website and the closing of this version of the project and the opening up to whatever we're going to do next. And so some of the things we're working to do next are working to get our findings, demands, and questions into the hands of peer workers, executive directors, board members, and funders. Our current priorities are building trainings for agency leaders and funders on how to support peers, going back to that recognition that people working in their own communities are not the ones who need the training, that there's actually profound need for training at the higher levels of agencies, supporting agencies in changing workplace culture, challenging prisons and jails to allow survivors of these systems to work inside them, and as you've heard here, planting the seeds for a peer worker union. We are available to consult with you and your agency as the core community that we are. If equitably compensated, ideally, we will not have to fight for that equitable compensation. We have had to fight quite a bit, and please ask us what equitable compensation means, because sometimes agencies have a different idea about what equitable compensation is than people whose labor is being undervalued. And we're also looking for funding opportunities to continue our work. So please reach out to us to discuss. So we now have a bit of time. We are going to go into breakout groups in about 15 minutes, but we wanted to take some time for any of your questions about our research project, about what we've done, about what we found. So I am going to turn it over to the space. What questions do folks have?
I have a question. What does we call it? He said, how did you say that? I want to make sure I said it right. A union for peer workers, right? What would that look like? How would that be? because peer workers are not hired on a full-time position, right? They're hired on a certain time, whatever like that, and looked at it a certain way, and treat us a certain way. How would the union do that? How do you to create a union? It's really hard, eh? Like it's so hard to make that happen. And then you're talking about organizations so much to go through. Everybody agree on this one thing. It's impossible. I don't know if you've ever been involved with it. I've been involved with like 2 organizations that try to become unionized, and it was the most difficult thing ever. And then people realized it wasn't the best thing ever. It actually didn't benefit them after. It still benefited the people that were higher up with that, right? And not the people that were in the lower spot. And that's the thing that unions, they say all these great things like security and support and stuff like that, but for the lower person, they don't have it.
That's a really fantastic question. And you've got Maria, Lindsay, and Sueda. Maybe that's the order I saw your hands to answer it.
I don't have a complete answer for the question, but there are a lot of peers that are hired full-time, and I think that it would depend on the organization itself as to how that would look, right? Because it depends on how many peers are hired and what the peers are hired for, right? We're not all hired for one particular type of job, right? We have various different positions doing various different things, and sometimes we are hired for a short period of time, but just like any other hire, like any other employee, it varies depending on the position, right? So because we are peers, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're restricted to a certain type of role per se. Like personally, like when I started realizing I was a peer, I started self-identifying as a peer. I had a role as a social service worker, and then I realized, hey, you know what, this lived experience thing, that makes it so much easier for people to relate to me, and therefore to open up to me, and our work was just got so much better that way. So I started self-identifying as a peer. It doesn't mean like my role was a peer per se, but also I've been hired as a peer in supervisor positions, right? So there's a very broad spectrum as to how that could look.
Les, I do not have an answer of how to start the union. I think for me, my experience in an organization where I was hired for my lived experience and we were unionized, when I was going through all my disciplinary processes that with my manager, and I say discipline, which automatically for me is triggering as someone who has been continuously disciplined within the prison system. I didn't even like that whole process, but my experience within union, having a union representative, that there was actually like interpersonal issues and conflict going on between my union rep and the manager. And I was getting pulled into their bullshit. And then I had union reps telling me to file harassment complaints and to build a case. How triggering. So like, I'm not a lawyer. And also, why is my life on trial, sort of thing? And so I would have really appreciated if it was a peer union, another peer union, or another peer group that could have at least advocated for me and been a rep for me, not my designated peer rep, because of the conflict. And so like, I actually felt being a part of a union was more triggering for me, and I really lacked support when I was told that I was being given a union rep and that I would be protected. And so that for me, that's why I was like, let's figure out, can we create a peer, like a union rep or some sort of support system for peers outside of their organization?
I think Lindsay and Maria touched on what I wanted to add, but another thing I wanted to say is what I'm noticing now within agencies is they're finding fancier terminology to hire people in peer roles. So your work title doesn't even have to have the word peer in it, but if you read the job description itself, a lot of it is peer work. So I think that kind of builds a little bit of confusion for people. And I definitely agree with what Lindsay just said, because I just recently had a similar experience where the union rep and like the management were having conflicts, and I felt like I was being pulled into it. And it really made me question, does my union rep have my best interest in mind? So, and the last thing I want to add is, it doesn't even have to be called a union. It can be something as similar to like a community of practice or something like that, where we have people who have these peer, who identify as peers. And I say that kind of broadly as well, because I truly believe that I am no longer in a peer position, but I still consider myself, like what Maria was saying, self-identifying as a peer. Is very important, because you don't have to be in a peer role now to be like, hey, you know what, I identify with a lot of what's being spoken about. I feel like even if you are in that position, you are able to maybe join something like a peer union. So yeah, I hope that made sense.
I'm not sure I'm saying your name right. Andre?
Yeah, Andre's fine. It's a Polish name, so it's pronounced Andrzej, but most people just call me Andrzej. So like Onjay would be the kind of okay way to say it. Or Andre is okay also. Anyway, that's a side note. More importantly, I just wanted to touch on, and I did join a little bit late. But so I'm not sure if this was touched on, but I believe it's the Ontario reduction or sorry, the Toronto Harm Reduction Workers Union. I know that that's not specifically focusing on peers, and I'm not sure what the status of that group is, but would perhaps I think Zoe Dodd was involved in that organization, and would reaching out to them, or maybe forming some type of collaboration, or just talking to someone over there, uh be somewhat do you all feel that that might be beneficial to getting this union started, or because it focused on harm reduction workers more broadly rather than peers specifically, would that be something that maybe would sidetrack from this and you'd want it to be something completely separate? Because I just feel like whenever there's opportunities to for folks in the harm reduction space to share knowledge in a meaningful way, it can be beneficial to do so, to just kind of help galvanize support, to avoid some of the pitfalls or past kind of barriers or roadblocks that a similar organization might have faced while they were trying to do that type of work. But I totally understand the distinction between peers and harm reduction workers. But I wondered if there's any thoughts or discussion or anything on that. And I'll throw a link to their Facebook page in the chat. And I also don't know what the status of this organization is at this time. Thank you.
So I want to make sure I want to give space to at least a couple other questions. I wonder if Les's hand went back up to answer something very specifically about the Harm Reduction Workers Union. Les, is that accurate?
Yes.
Do you want to speak super briefly?
So with that right now is like it is something that it is an ongoing thing, but it is no way in of the aspect of all organizations that we talk about. Everybody here, there's so many people that work with different organizations and different funding, whatever that. It's not even close to that, to be that. And that's such a hard thing to see how that is, right? And that's you know, you could try to be like, say, okay, oh, that's a great idea, well, awesome, it's a great idea, but most every organization I know of always fights against you to create a union on them. That's a non-union, and then the people that that are on the front line there, they usually get the brunt of it, right? And so it's a lot of work, and time, and suffering and stuff like that. So it's not that easy. Like I wish it would. Like you say, okay, we're a credit union, that's it. No. Your work has to create that situation to happen for you, so that they agree with you, but you actually call them out on something, and usually that doesn't work out good for you, right?
I want to also say thank you for this question and for this conversation. I want to also just say to the question of the Harm Reduction Workers Union in terms of our work, that was something we looked at in various ways at our work, within our research. And so absolutely, it's something that is an interesting model and that we're aware of, and thank you. I am conscious we only have a few more minutes, so.
Sorry, what do you mean by that? Like, so you looked at it, you found it interesting.
I feel like I can't speak more to how we looked at it because it was in the context of our interviews, and I don't want to like identify anything. But it's in our report. We talk about it in our report, and so we looked at sort of how powerful the organizing was, and also where things are at now. Does that answer that?
No, because like when people say like interested in somebody, okay, interested in someone, you look from afar, and you say, okay, that's interesting, but interesting.
No,
not
so
like you.
We definitely had input from folks who had been involved, and we were looking at it as part of the Harm Reduction Workers Union. Yeah, with organizing around that.
So this was just talked about now. Like, can you say something about it?
I want to make sure that there's space and time for other questions. And I also think
that a big question.
It is a big question, but there are so many questions, and I want to give us space.
There's 100
to also go into breakout groups.
So right now you're saying like there's a question, but we don't have time for that. That's not important right now.
Let me see if I can try to clarify. In my sense was that from like the research that we did, and so we'd love to reconnect, was that where the Harm Reduction Workers Union is at right now is sort of dormant. That was our sense, that there was incredibly powerful organizing that happened, and that as a union structure at the moment it's dormant, and that we would love to reconnect. But that was our sense from when we did our interviews and research, which maybe isn't accurate to right now.
Then why bring it up then? That's the thing. Like, I don't understand that.
I didn't bring it up.
No, I know you didn't. Not you. I'm not talking.
I was just curious about because there was a previous union. I just thought I'd ask that question, and I guess it's been answered now. So thank you, Griffin.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great conversation. And I wonder if we want to think about one more question and then breakout groups.
Yeah. No. Somebody said, "Can we move on?" So yeah, sure, fine.
So I'm having a hard time deciding which questions to answer, and so my hope is that we'll be able to talk about them in breakout groups. But maybe the sort of last question to the sort of whole team is around creating job security. So like, what does job security look like? So I've seen several different questions around like what is, because there's a lot of excuses that come around like, well, we're trying to give opportunities for lots of people to do this work, and so we can't give job security. So any thoughts from the team about what job security should look like? Yes, Sueda, please.
I don't know. I find this so complicated because, I feel like what's happening is that, people who are considered to be vulnerable are hired into these positions. And the truth is that they actually can do the work a lot more effectively than most people within these agencies and organizations, and have so much profound experience, but are being put in positions where their jobs are precarious, they get paid minimum wage. And then, you know, from my own experience, you're told that, you know, maybe you need more credentials. I've been telling myself for years that I need to go back to school to get a master's in social work, when in reality, like, the fact that you need to have a degree to work in social work is a huge joke. I should be able to get my master's because of all the experience and work experience that I have. So it's just a power trip. That's all it is. And it's really, really sad and upsetting. And you know what, like, if anything, peers should be getting paid more than your average case manager or your average supervisor, because of how much they're being exposed to as well. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
From just really quickly, like job security, it's funny how we're still talking to like us and them, like peers, and we all want job security. Every single one of us in this space want job security. And so I struggle sometimes with us still differentiating and this idea of having to deconstruct, like separating peers and other workers. And so I think, like, even when we're moving through like changing workplace culture, and that's what I meant about one of the demands of giving up your power, like, we're all humans and we all typically have needs and wants, and there's really no difference, because I am courageous enough to put my lived experience on blast every single day and to apply. I actually could only apply for jobs that said that if you've been incarcerated, apply here. Those are the only jobs I could ever get. And I went to school and I got credentials. And so the one thing that's kind of creative around job security too, for people, organizations, if you're hiring folks who are involved in the with police or being in and out of jail, like, will you hold their job for them if they get arrested? If they get picked up, would you hold their job for them so that when they get out, do you have access to lawyers on your board that could help them? You know, and I think that there's creative ways and there's things that you guys wouldn't think about, but is a regular occurrence for people who are continuously revolving through the prison doors or through the injustice system, right? And so asking people who are criminalized in your organization what they need, and if they say, well, look, if I get picked up because I'm an active drug user, but I have these fucking conditions not to have drugs on me and I'm on probation, are you going to hold my job for me? What are you going to say as a manager, as a supervisor? Right. And so I actually think asking people what they need for job security would be really helpful, instead of telling people what job security looks like.
Maybe we can close this part of the conversation with a thought from Maddie, and then make the breakout rooms available and see what that experiment does. So Maddie, if you can give us kind of the last word on this particular part of this Q&A.
Yeah. Job security to me means that we're hired as people with lived experience as first and foremost. We're given a contract, we're given sick days, we're treated like everybody else in the workplace. I think that they should even have supervisor positions for people with lived experience. Like, nothing should change just because we have that lived experience. If anything, it's more beneficial. But why should we be paid minimum wage or less, not be able to take a week off in the summertime because we don't have sick days? Like, it's bullshit, right? So I think it's just being treated fairly. We're staff. We're on every level of everybody else in that organization. That is the best way to do it for job security. Okay, I'm done. We can move on.
Okay, we have the option, folks have the option to stay here and to keep having this particular conversation. Everything is totally optional now. I mean, everything has always been optional, but we're going to try this experiment with breakout rooms, and I don't know how it's going to go, but my hope is that it will serve some